I'm really very excited to introduce you to someone who I know quite well, Mary Strong, a wonderful woman from our She Recovers Together community, and someone I'm getting to know now. And I really have been looking at her work for quite a long time, have nothing but respect for, and I'm really delighted to welcome you here today, Meghan. So Meghan Perry, CAR-CRCP, is a creator, educator, storyteller, teaching artist, facilitator, and recovery coach professional. She is a CCAR Recovery Coach Academy facilitator and the creator of the Recovery Storytelling Workshop series, as well as many other unique workshops that combine the art and science of recovery coaching with the performing arts, creating transformational experiences that bring resilience, healing, connection, and empowerment to youth and adults from all walks of life. She is the education theater consultant for Second Act, creating theater and storytelling experience grounded in the addiction recovery experience, community engagement, and social justice. When she's not coaching, creating, or teaching, you'll most likely find her in the woods. So you can, and we're going to share all of the information about how to connect with Meghan in the chat and on Facebook. Mary Strong is a former elementary school teacher who currently works as the educational liaison for a foster care agency. She's also a mother of two energetic, wonderful toddlers, a wife, a She Recovers volunteer, and a woman in long-term recovery. Her patchwork of recovery includes her faith in God, She Recovers, 12-step work, a recovery coach, counseling, and seeking healthy pathways towards healing instead of numbing. Mary firmly believes in the power of connection and recovery and the need to share our stories when we are ready in order to bring light to and heal the parts of us that we have kept in the dark for so long. Those things, along with the feedback from many other people in the recovery community, led her to create her story, which is now transitioning to our common foundation offering, which will be called Your Story Space. And we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this. But in the meantime, I'm just so delighted. Mary, thank you so much for being here. And Meghan. So what I'm going to do now, Meghan, is I'm going to spotlight you. There you are. And I'm just going to turn things over to you. And when you're done, you can pitch things back to me, and I will pitch forward to Mary. So thank you again for being here. And we look forward to this very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dawn. I'm excited to be here as well with Mary and with you and with the She Recovers community. You probably, I don't know if you caught everything in the bio. You don't need to, but the main points are I'm a person in long-term recovery. God willing, it will be 10 years in December. I am a recovery coach professional. I've been coaching for the last 7 years, and I've been training recovery coaches for the last 2. Along the way, also, I studied theater education and was introduced to the art form of personal narrative storytelling. And for the last 5 years, I have been so blessed to get to work at the intersection of substance use prevention, treatment, and recovery, combined with the performing arts. And that is why I am here. So let me just show you what we're going to do. We are going to just like, I'm going to show you the agenda real quick. So we're going to talk first about how stories heal individuals, and then how stories heal communities, and the role of recovery storytelling in the healing process. So recovery storytelling is something that I believe it was gifted to me. Some people might say I've created it, but we'll learn a little bit about that later on, and how I sort of brought those things together. So I want to start by sharing something with you that is near and dear to my heart. This is from a project that I did in collaboration with the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery and Retrospective Films. And this is a story of my own that I worked on and honed and created over a number of years. And it's just a good example of the healing power of storytelling. So we'll watch that video, and then I'll talk a little bit about my journey with the profound amount of healing that I've gotten from both storytelling myself and working with others with story. So let me bring up that video.
knew it was my dad's last Christmas, but still, I'm sitting in my car, snorting lines in the hospital parking lot, just avoiding going in because I didn't want to face him and his death. And so I waited too long and I missed Christmas dinner and I rushed in and made excuses and rushed out and I left. And I didn't go back to see him until the middle of March when my stepmother called and she said, Meghan, you need to come now. So I went and he was there in a hospital bed in his living room, just slowly dying of cancer. And when I looked down in that hospital bed and I saw the tiny just sliver of a man that was in there, I didn't feel anything because that wasn't my dad. My dad was a giant. He was larger than life. He loved to have a good time. He was strong and charismatic, and he would chop wood and sail boats, and he would dance around the living room to the Rolling Stones, singing and clapping and going, come on, Meghan, dance with me. So I sat with him. I sat with him and watched the tides go in and out on the river below. And I watched and waited for the bald eagle to come and sit in the tree outside the window like it did sometimes. My dad and I, we loved the blues and birds. After 4 days, I left. And I don't remember saying goodbye to my dad, but I do remember stealing his OxyContin on the way out the door. And I went home and I got high, and I got so high that I couldn't answer the phone when my stepmother called 2 days later. And I didn't call her back for another 2 days after that. And she just said, Meghan, you don't need to come now. It's over. And I hung up that phone and I sat on my bed and surrounded by paraphernalia and wreckage and active addiction, filthy apartment. And I couldn't feel anything. And I couldn't cry. I just got high. And I got high and I tried to make everything go away. And as always, it worked in the beginning until it didn't. And I was just left, just completely devastated, more devastated than I'd ever been before. But that's when things started to change. And now I have this crazy, incredible life in recovery. And I like to think that somehow that's because of my dad.
Okay, so that is a story that has been incredibly healing for me. When I first got into recovery, I was really on fire for recovery advocacy and criminal justice reform. And I was telling my story over and over and over. And also part of my pathway was 12 steps. So I was telling it there over and over and over. And I was telling it from a place of disconnection. You know, I was telling it like, oh, this happened and this happened and this happened. It was all really, really bad. And then this amazing transformational moment happened and now everything's awesome. And it was so simplistic and so like stale, and it didn't, you know, it had its purpose, but for me, I was looking for something more with it. And so when I discovered this art form of personal narrative storytelling, it totally changed the way I tell stories from my whole life. It sort of introduced art into the process, and I could be creative, and I could even be playful and artistic with it. And it allowed me to think, instead of thinking I have to tell my whole story, you know, so many of us in recovery, it's like my recovery story. But really, that journey is a tapestry of stories. We are a tapestry of stories. We're not just one story. There is no one story that defines any particular part of our lives. And so this artful storytelling, this creative storytelling allowed me to just pull a thread out from this huge tapestry of stories that I'm made of and look at it more closely and play with it a little. And that really changed everything. It changed my relationship to myself, especially the internal journey that I take when I go and work on a story is it's very multifaceted and it's deep, and it has brought me into new relationship with myself. The first time I told the story about my dad, it was about me crashing his dream car and about him forgiving me for that and lying about it because I was stoned and drunk and I didn't tell him and all of that. And over the years, I continued to rework that story and dig a little deeper and dig a little deeper until it became the story that you just saw, which is truly what the story of that moment in my life is about, is losing my dad and not being present. And what that also did was allow me to go back and see the person that was Meghan in that time and understand her better and just meet her where she was in that moment. Not as just an addict or a terrible daughter or someone who had no courage to face up to what was happening, but just as a woman who was had a terrible addiction, was so lost, didn't feel like she had any choices, didn't understand what was going on within and without her. And I can have so much more love and empathy and ultimately forgiveness for her. I have forgiven myself for leaving my dad when he was dying and for stealing that medication. And I've only been able to do that by really digging into the story. Another thing that's happened for me in that storytelling process is, I lived inside this box called addict felon. It's how I defined myself. It's how everyone else defined me. That was all I was. That was the sum of my parts, was addict felon. I had been addicted for so long. And the criminal justice system had dominated my life for so long that I couldn't see outside of that box. And I told my story over and over and over from that perspective. And I continued to allow people to see me that way until I started to tell these stories in this different way, which allowed me to see that I was just a person. I was just a person. I was a person with a bunch of stuff going on, doing the best that she could. And so it just smashed that box to pieces. And I became just a human, just a person with who these things happened to me, or I participated in these things, but I'm still just a person. And that's part of the strength of the appeal of this kind of storytelling too, to reach others, because we're talking on a heart level. We're connecting with our feelings in our hearts, and that's very, very moving and powerful stuff. Also, I really believe that stories are living, breathing beings of their own that I'm in relationship with. And so again, this type of storytelling has allowed me to evolve and grow and change as the story evolves and grows and changes. And then like those two are, intertwined. So as I've developed in my recovery, I've been able to develop this story about my dad and many other stories like it, to sort of be most true for me in this moment. So once I figured this stuff out for myself, I wanted to, expand and bring this to other people. So I'll talk a little bit about that with recovery storytelling in a few minutes, but I do want to just look at storytelling as a tool. It's an amazing tool for recovery. There are so many benefits of storytelling in the world of healing. The number one thing that I see is the reauthoring. We get to rewrite our own stories, and we get to write them from a place of greater healing or greater health and well-being. And so, instead of the terrible addict who was a jerk and, stole her dad's meds and didn't care that her dad was dying, I go back and say, no, I was a human I was in terrible, terrible pain and sadness, and I felt like my world was falling apart. But I came through that. I came through the other side. I was able to walk through that. It just allows us to rewrite stories. The stories we write originally, we're writing them in the moment. So, the story of me stealing meds from my dad, I sort of wrote that story for myself when it was happening or shortly thereafter, when I was really unwell, when I was, in incredible pain and, in the midst of trauma or whatever it is. So when I tell it now, I get to rewrite it and from a much healthier standpoint. Validation. I felt like I was never seen or known by others for all those years of active addiction and even into recovery. I never felt like anybody truly knew me. And so when I tell a story or I share a story, or any of us do, then other people get to see us and know us. And that's really powerful validation. And then that also increases connection. I'm more connected to myself and all the selves I have been. And it connects me to others, which also creates empathy. It builds the capacity for understanding and forgiveness. Again, this is inward facing, but it does translate. It will then, permeate and come out into the, healing in communities. But it starts with me. I have to have empathy for the woman that I have been my whole life, all of those women that I have been. And if I can love her and forgive her and understand her, that's how I can bring it to others too. Ownership. I love that I get to tell the story the way I see it. It's my story. It's about me. And I get to write it. The newspaper doesn't get to write it. The media, the flashy, doom and gloom obsessed news doesn't get to write that story for me. I write it the way I see it and what's true for me. That's a really powerful thing, to own your own stories. And then there's externalizing. This is a little more clinical. If you're interested in this kind of thing, narrative therapy is a whole sort of genre within the clinical world of working with story. And one of the most powerful things, and one of the founding tenets of narrative therapy, is externalizing. The problem is the problem. I am not the problem. I am me, and the problem is over here, and we're connected, but that problem does not define me. And so by processing stories and sharing stories and telling stories, we get to externalize that problem. I am not an addict. I'm a person who suffers from addiction, or I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder. I'm a person with a disease or an illness or a struggle. Person first language, separating the problem from us. So it can be incredibly powerful. Specifically in recovery, there's some things that I think are especially relevant for us. Because we've lived, whatever our experiences were with our relationship to substances or relationships or whatever it is. I list many things on my list of things I'm recovering from, or trying to recover from. So gaining new perspectives on our old selves, all of those people that we were, that we don't want to be like anymore, we get to go back and sort of look at that with a much more informed and healed lens to see ourselves differently. I talked about labels, shedding old labels. Oh, are we all labeled up in the recovery world or what? We aren't all the labels. We're people with experiences, or people with a problem that we're, a challenge that we're facing. We are not those challenges, problems, diseases, whatever. And then I love this idea of becoming more whole as we embrace all of those parts of ourselves. I know I've heard many people in recovery say, well, I don't talk about before. I don't want anything to do with before. And I see it a little bit differently. I see it as I am still all of those people. All of those people live within me. And when I can bring them in and embrace all of those past selves and love them and know them and see them and honor and respect them, it sort of makes me a more whole human with, a greater sort of scope and ability to take things in and operate in the world from a place of wholeness. And in healing for communities, all of those things that I just spoke about then radiate back out into, into the space of community. Storytelling is ancient, it's cave art, it's songs and chanting, monks from the beginning of music, it's Netflix, it's TikTok, Facebook, we are just surrounded by stories all of the time and have been since our earliest days, and there's a reason for that. It's a way to pass on shared norms and values, beliefs, and culture. Story sharing builds acceptance of self and others. It's a wonderful way to create change, because as we understand each other better and we identify shared goals, we can then work towards them. And universal, the storytelling has one major superpower, and that is feelings. I see feelings as the most basic human language. It's the thing that we share across all barriers. We all have feelings. So storytelling can be really powerful in the way it unites people and overcomes obstacles, barriers, and ways that we separate each other. And then trust. Stories told in safe spaces create an amazing amount of trust. That vulnerability, honesty, authenticity are gold. They're so powerful in bringing us all together and sort of just establishing a safe and known community together. And then again, my favorite thing in the world, which is the tapestry. So I pull a thread out from my tapestry and I tell a story, and every single person in that space then holds that thread, and they add their thread and they tell a story. And again, everyone in that space has that thread, and together we weave this incredibly strong fabric that holds all of us together. And that kind of fabric can carry us through anything, the worst of times, and make us stronger and resilient and connected and whole. So all that has sort of come together for me in recovery storytelling. So I just want to spend a few minutes talking about recovery storytelling, what it is, how it works. So that the definition that I like to use for recovery storytelling, which I started this, will be coming up on 5 years, I think, pretty soon, 5 years ago, and it's grown and changed many times. But it's essentially a combination of advocacy, art, and healing in the way that we create and share stories. And in the process of doing this, it increases resilience, it builds bridges and connections, and it empowers individuals and communities to grow, heal, and affect change. It's really, it began as an advocacy. That was its original purpose for me. I thought, wow, if we can tell these kinds of stories to people, to unsuspecting people, that aren't just here to hear a recovery story, but in other spaces and places, and really touch them and move them, then that can change people's beliefs and understanding and feelings towards people with substance use disorder or whatever other challenge it might be. Over the years, it's grown immensely. We've partnered with CCAR and done big things. I've trained all of their staff and volunteers and everything. We've had over 400 people take the recovery storytelling workshop or participate in other events. it's been customized for all different kinds of populations, and it's currently under research at Northeastern to hopefully prove clinical efficacy. So let me tell you what it actually is. So it's a workshop, and it's an 8-hour workshop, as it's sort of original or most true form. And in that process, it's a small group. You go through a story creation process together. So you learn about the craft of storytelling. You have a lot of opportunities to share story within the process. There's a, we get to discover new stories. I give you prompts in that so that you can break out of that whole recovery story piece and pick out a thread. Because when we get to look at that thread, we get to get into scenes and sensory details and the feelings, and really craft that thread really carefully to make a really powerful story. And people, the bonding that happens in the group is incredible. Everybody in the group is totally a resource in that process. It's really a bonding, connecting, healing, powerful experience to just really dig in on a story, share that with others, and then have this creative format in which to shape it and dig a little deeper into it. So again, that's been adapted, expanded, it's been all over the place, but I cannot express the many different ways in which I've seen recovery storytelling help people. I really, really believe in the art form of storytelling to heal. And when we combine that with people with, really challenging experiences and, what others may see as like a dark past or whatever, it's such a great way to take our stories and our stuff and put it in the light and love on it and look at it and get to see it in a different way, forgive ourselves and just have others get to do that with us. They see us. They see that new person or being or relationship come to being. So it's grown incredibly. There's a lot going on with it. Let me just show you some of the other things. So, we have, I hold regular workshops. We have a free monthly story gathering, first Monday of every month, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then all kinds of other events. CCAR has partnered, which is the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery, has partnered with me. We do monthly story slams where 2 people will win $100 each for the best stories, and then they can compete in a grand slam where it's $500 goes to 2 winners each, and they're just fun to watch and participate in. There's a recovery storytelling community Facebook group that you can join that keeps you up to date on all of the things, and there's story prompts and story tips and that sort of thing. Recovery storytelling is a main track at the Multiple Pathways of Recovery Conference. There'll be one in January in Florida and one in May in Colorado. So that's a great way to meet. The conference is amazing. It's really fun and very, you just feel sort of part of that whole fabric of that recovery movement. And then there's a monthly newsletter. You can find all of that information I'll put the links in the chat, and I'm sure that She Recovers has another sort of mechanism for sharing that information, and you'll be able to find all of the things so you can get involved. So yeah, I'm just really excited that y'all had a chance to learn a little bit about storytelling. I encourage you to find spaces and places to tell stories, share stories, listen to stories. It's really, really powerful. So thank you.
Well, Meghan, I am still recovering from your story with your dad. So thank you so much for sharing that. It was absolutely beautiful, and I could relate on a lot of different levels. So thank you. It was really beautiful. And I was excited already, but I'm so excited to be introducing you to our community, and can't wait until we can have a conversation about how we can host a how She Recovers Foundation can host you to do something. I just, like you, I've been doing this recovery thing for 34 years, and I understand the power of story. And I understood it the very first time that I, in a very quiet, shaking voice with tears streaming down my face, the very first time I started to tell my story, because I'd never told anybody what was true for me. And so the power is there, and it's just beautiful. And yeah, I'm really, really excited. So I'm going to just, and I know that in our community, we have twice daily meetings, and we have specialty population groups where women and non-binary individuals who identify with women's communities are gathering on the daily and weekly to share their stories. Not in quite the crafted artistic way that you're going to lead us all to do, but nonetheless in a very passionate and powerful way. So I'd really like to invite Mary to talk to us a little bit about why she decided it was time to start something within our community, kind of with the people in our community, something called Her Story.
Yes, thank you, Dawn. And Meghan, that was so beautiful. I love the idea of the tapestry and the threads and weaving it together to hold us all up. I mean, that is just beautiful. It sums everything up so nicely. So I'm Mary Strong, and I officially started my recovery in May of 2019, and I started with 12-step. And that was probably the first experience I had of learning I'm not alone in my struggles. It was my first kind of taste that I wasn't the only one. Other people felt what I felt, and it was just freeing. But then I discovered She Recovers, and I lurked on the Facebook page for a bit. Finally joined the online gatherings in the summer of 2020. And when I did that, it was like, not only did I feel like I belonged, but I felt like I was wanted and loved and accepted just for who I was. I knew right away that She Recovers was a special place. So attending the gatherings and all of that, I found myself connecting to the strength and the vulnerability of those who were sharing in the gatherings about these dark places that they had been or that they were at. And they weren't shying away from the topics that other people were shying away from because they would bring shame, but they were showing how bringing their shame into the light helped them to heal and grow. And that's so inspiring. Their vulnerability gave me permission to be vulnerable. And I think when we're able to be vulnerable with others, our recovery really starts to deepen. So I loved the gatherings, and they were a safe haven, but we've got the 3-minute, so everybody has time to share at the gatherings. There's that 3-minute cutoff. And it was April 15th of this year. It's a Friday morning meeting. And I was on a gathering, and I heard a woman share their 3-minute share. And I wanted to know more. Like immediately, I was like, no, don't cut them off. No. But so then I was like, okay, well, I'm sure I could call this person up and ask them, and I'm sure they would share their story with me. But I felt like I wanted to do more than that. And I really believed in that moment that my higher power, which I call God, led me in a different direction than just doing it for myself. Right. And in making friends in this community, I had a feeling that I wasn't the only one that wanted to know more. So thankfully, I had people in the community that I could lean on with this idea. The first one being my She Recovers Bessie, Sarah Schmidt. And the thing about that is that she was excited about the idea. She helped me decide on formats and details and all that sort of stuff, but she encouraged me and gave me the confidence that a space like Her Story could really be a benefit to this community. So then I took it to a wider group of people in recovery, and I said, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? And it was just an emphatic yes. Like, I want to do that. I'd be a part of it. I'll share my story. I'll do this. And so within like a span of 3 hours, we had a name, Her Story. We had a Zoom account, thanks to Meyer. We had a speaker, and a date, which was that Sunday. So 2 days later, we had our first story event. And from there, the space just grew. And what I loved was that I listened to speaker after speaker share their truths, just raw and honest and so vulnerable. But then I also saw the listeners connecting. Like many times there were tears or just the nods and all of that. It just felt so powerful to see such strong connection. But my favorite part is the end where we open it up for reflections. The listeners can share reflections of the speaker's story, and the amount of me toos and your words touched me, and I just connected with that and I needed to hear it. It just reinforced so much the power of the space for both the speaker and the listener. And there were times, it'd be a Sunday and I would be really struggling with something, depression or anxiety or any of that stuff. And I would come to her story and I would hear somebody who climbed the mountain and overcame their struggles. And it just gave me peace and hope and just the knowledge that we do recover. So then when Dawn approached me about bringing this to the She Recovers community, I was just so excited because I think the reach that it'll reach more people in recovery, give more people the opportunity to utilize the space, is going to be so fantastic. And I love the name change from Her Story to Your Story, because at the beginning when we were coming up with Her Story, Nika, another woman in the She Recovers community, I was like, I don't know if this is inclusive enough. I don't want to offend anybody. I want to make sure everybody feels welcome. So then when She Recovers came and said, we'd like to rename it to Your Story with the "our" in caps, I thought that was just perfect. I mean, it just was such a great touch to add for the inclusivity. So my hope for the space is just that people, whenever they're ready to recover out loud, or maybe they've been recovering out loud, whether it's their first time or their 30th time sharing their stories, that they feel comfortable coming to this space and that they feel encouraged to come to this space because it is safe and inclusive and non-judgmental. And I always say, what's meant to be said in these stories will be said, and what's meant to be heard will be heard, right? So many stories, but I really love, Meghan, what you were talking about the thread, pulling out a thread. And I think that's something that people who come to the Your Story space need to hear too. They might not tell their entire life story, but they have a piece that is so important to share. So I really am excited for this new space.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Mary. And thank you for the initiative and all that you've done. And I know that the members of our community who have made up all the speakers and I'm sure an abundance of the listening audience since you started this lovely series is very grateful to you for this as well. And the Your Story, that was Lisa Nixon. So it's small y, capital O, capital U, R. So your, but a our kind of story, which is just a nod to, definitely an invitation to be more inclusive. And we're very excited about it. And it kind of kicks off officially as a She Recovers Foundation offering this Sunday.
Yes.
Correct? At 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern.
And our first speaker will be Margaret Ward, who is going to share her story in hopes that you'll hear something from your story out of it. So I'm very excited for that.
Well, we're excited too. Thank you. And you can find out more about that. It's now listed on our She Recovers Together online webpage. So where all of our daily meetings and weekly, especially population meetings, as well as the schedule and links there too are. So just find our website under online programs, Together Online. And Meghan, it occurs to me, and I meant to say this when what strikes me about, and you said how much you love the idea and the word tapestry. And I can tell you that She Recovers, the foundation, the movement, everything that we've been doing with She Recovers for the past 10 years is based very much on my daughter Taryn's and my attachment to the word patchwork. And so I do, you know, and I got patchwork from William White in an article that he wrote about when he talked about, you know, recovery pathway. We say pathways and patchwork because I think there's both, but pathways are part of the patchwork. And his point was that in recovery, when we say pathways, it makes it sound like you can go this way or you can go this way. And it's really not that way. There's so many different ways that you can recover, and it's not just one or the other. You might go this way and then that way and this way and that way. So we've really attached ourselves to this concept of patchwork. And in the past, when I talk about patchwork, I've explained it and described it as, think of a tapestry of all the various ways. And what I love about what you've done with that is we talk about the patchwork, the tapestry of our community, of our personal recovery. And then for you to take it forward in the same way that we do with our patchwork, that in our community, we have women, all sorts of patchworks of different types of women. And so it's just beautiful. And I always think, I wish I was a quilter. I can't do anything with that sewing thing, but just the vision of it is so beautiful. So thank you. I think, unless Meghan, if you have anything else to say after Mary's share, I'm just going to start looking and see where our questions are.
No, I'll just say that I love it. Your story, her story. I think story sharing in any form, you know, with some safe boundaries, of course, too, depending on levels of vulnerability and all that. And it seems like you've created that and held that really well. So that's great to hear. And I also think of pathways as a tapestry. You know,
Wonderful.
I have many different threads in my pathway of recovery. And I would also say that recovery is a tapestry of things, because I'm in recovery from substance use disorder, mental illness, trauma, you know, you go on, and that's a patchwork. That's a tapestry. And so, yeah, I love that imagery.
Our first guiding intention and guiding principle is we're all recovering from something. So I sometimes say it's difficult for us to explain what She Recovers is all about, because we're about all the things. We're about all the ways we recover from the things. We're about all of the different stages that we're at with our recovery of the things. So it's hard to distill it. I think I definitely need a storytelling workshop so that I can just capture what I really hope to say. So I'm really looking forward to working with you. Really, really looking forward to it.
Yeah. And recovery storytelling is recovering. And I do say the same thing, whatever you're in recovery from. We have people who it's chronic illness. We have people who it's disability. We have people who it's a loved one's journey from grief. I mean, you name it. All of it is those are all stories to be told and to be held and valued and, you know, honored. So
Beautiful. So here's our first question from an anonymous attendee. I love the quote, "Shame dies when stories are told in safe spaces," from Anne Voskamp. Do you have any advice for finding and identifying what may be a safe space or community to try sharing my story? I am afraid of sharing my story and have it be judged and criticized. Obviously, I'm going to have an answer for this person, but I'll let you go first, Meghan, as well.
yeah. Well, I'm going to say, of course, your story and her story is that kind of space. I think, you know, there are many communities in which storytelling is held as it should be, which is carefully and beautifully with honor and all of that. Specifically in the recovery world, like, you know, of course, that's what I do with recovery storytelling. And there's a lot of different places. A story gathering might be a good place to start for that. It's usually very small. It's very informal. They're not stories that have been practiced or crafted or anything. It's just saying things that maybe have never been said before, or playing with how you say them or whatever. So the gatherings are good. You know, I think there's a lot of pathways that hold that kind of space too, depending on what your tapestry of pathways looks like. You may find that somewhere within those. You know, there's writers communities, there's the storytelling community. I mean, I fell head over heels in love with the storytelling community. So the wider storytelling community, you think about the Moth, MOTH, the Moth story slams, which are local and in person. There's just a whole world out there that isn't specific to any kind of storytelling. It's just people who love stories. But I do think that there is, you know, understanding what those safe boundaries are within any group that you're in is definitely worth consideration.
You know, I love that. And also, I've just remembered that when I was in university, my first shot at university, and then I gave it up to do more cocaine. But I took a course, like a course on storytelling, and I don't think I've thought about that for 30 years. Isn't that interesting? Mary, would you like to respond to this question? I'm sure I saw you nodding, so I think that you probably have some ideas as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we would love to have anyone who feels ready and at their time to tell their story at the Your Story space. She Recovers also put out this fantastic toolkit, and I'm sure it's probably linked somewhere, about tools and ways to start telling your story if you haven't yet. And I think that is so helpful. And to speak of the fear of being judged and whatnot, I can tell you that at least so far in the Your Story and Her Story space, it's been nothing but just like in the She Recovers space in general. It's been nothing but being held and loved. So I would really encourage you to check out the spaces, come and listen to a Your Story session, or even a She Recovers gathering, and just feel the presence of being held. And I think that will ease anybody's mind who has those fears. And also, all the Your Story sessions are not recorded, and we ask that nobody take pictures or talk about anything outside of the space. So there are definitely boundaries in place to try and keep that supportive, positive, encouraging atmosphere. So yeah.
Wonderful, Mary. My response would just be that I see kind of telling our story as having two layers of it. One is just the telling of the story for the first time, where we've never spoken to anybody about what we're recovering from. And that's for me, that's the importance of finding a community like She Recovers, or other online recovery communities, or in person when we get back to that, where you can just start talking about what's happening for you now and what happened to you. And then I think we have another principle called When We're Ready, We Recover Out Loud, so that women who are struggling can find and join our movement. And that's kind of taking your story outwards. And Meghan, you referred to this, maybe I'll get back to you and you can speak a little bit more about this, but and I think it's two different purposes. One is really when you're out looking for connection and understanding and compassion and support. And then the other where you feel like you've got something to say and you want other people to know that this is possible. Is any of that resonating for you, Meghan?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, that differentiation is important in story sharing. And that's how I ended up with that sort of advocacy, art, and healing, because they are three different things, although they can be woven together. But I don't ever encourage, like I don't ever push anybody to share their story outside the workshop. There's, just for an example, I just say, come in and just hang out with us and, do your thing. If you want to share your story later, great. But sharing, recovery advocacy is a different thing. And it has, a specific purpose, and it has specific, tenets that are effective and accepted, and all of that. And it's an incredibly powerful thing to participate in when you are ready. But I look even at myself telling those stories early on, like really early in recovery, and just dragging out, there's a phrase I don't want to use, but just, rifling through all the bad stuff and trotting that out. And it wasn't good for me. It didn't help me. That wasn't a way in which to share my story that was healing or helpful.
Yeah. And
the intimacy, I think, is where the true healing comes. And that can be just one person. I often encourage people to start with writing and move out from there. If you just want to make sense of things and just get it on paper, then verbally tell it to one person, and then you can sort of expand your circle from there.
Right.
But yeah, You always get to choose your level of vulnerability too. And I just want to put that out there. You own that line. Like you own,
Yeah.
you have ownership of that story, where you go with it, what you tell, and don't ever forget that. You never have to tell anything you don't want to.
That's a great segue to our next question, which is, do any of you, Mary, Meghan, or Dawn, have suggestions on sharing my story from a trauma-informed lens? I feel there is a way to share my experience from struggle to healing without going down a vortex of traumatic details and focusing on the hope of my story, which is just almost exactly what you said. I want to share that there is, and maybe somebody can share it. I don't have the link. It's on my phone, Lisa, but I don't have it at my fingertips on this platform. But we do have a blog post, a blog that is about recovering out loud and sharing your story. And I just want to say, when I say when we're ready, I mean when we're ready, but I also mean we recover out loud. Recovering out loud might be one day you share the fact that you're in recovery with one other person in some context. That's still recovering out loud. So I would say, I know that in this blog post about recovering out loud and sharing a story, we do talk about how to share your story. And also, you know, in our gatherings, for instance, at the beginning of each gathering, we give guidance around, you know, please don't share specific details, like, because we're trying to be, we are a trauma-informed space. So, Meghan, what do you have anything to share with us around this idea?
I would say that trauma-informed is one of the most critical elements of holding space for storytelling. And so it should be done with, you know, with care, consideration, and knowledge about trauma-informed practice. There's definitely a time and a place for, and the phrase that I was going to use, and she is trauma porn, right? So we sometimes get into this sort of rut in some of our pathways and in some of our spaces that we share, where we're just dragging out the bad stuff. And let me tell you, the only definition of self that I had when I got here was that I was a badass. The only thing I could be proud of was how bad of an addict I was, or how bad of, you know, how many times I've been arrested or whatever. So, you know, stepping out of that kind of, you know, digging through the bad stuff is important. And it takes, you know, you can have guidance from another person to help you move through that and see, you know, when you go back and rewrite that story and re-author that story, you don't have to tell the story you made when you were in trauma. You tell the story that you see now, that you actually had helpers, that you had incredible courage or resilience or tenacity, that, you know, it turned out to be a blessing. You just couldn't see it then. I mean, there's just so much to find in there that lives in light. But, you know, my workshop's fully, definitely trauma informed. I think it's really important that those who are leading spaces like that have those tools to help people walk from that into a new relationship with it.
Yeah, I like to think that trauma details are for your therapist, that you can impart, really, you can, I mean, if I say to you, you know, if I'm telling my story and I talk about a sexual assault or a rape at 19, I don't need to go into too much detail about what that looked like. I can acknowledge that happened for me without, you know, triggering everybody else who may have had that experience. So
yeah. I always say, you can tell me that, you know, I might say, oh, so I, you know, I took a hit, but I'm not going to tell you how I packed the pipe, what it was with, what kind of litter, you know, don't need to.
Yeah.
All you know, whatever serves the story is the level of information we need, which is generally not a whole lot. So yeah, I talk about safe language too. Yeah. Don't give us the descriptives. Violence, self-harm, and drug or alcohol use are the ones. Yeah.
Mary, do you have something to add?
I mean, I think you guys have covered all of it. Again, I'd point people to the She Recovers Toolkit. I think there's a lot of really good information on that, and also to listen to other people's stories. I think that they're really great models for how to tell your stories. I mean, Meghan is one of them. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have.
Great. So somebody is asking how they become a speaker for your story. And I think we have shared that, and we can share it again. Somebody can share the link to applying to become a speaker for your story. And then sorry, there was another question and now I can't see where it went.
Yes, yes, I believe it was about the pricing on my workshops.
Right.
So I want recovery storytelling to be available to everybody. So the pricing is you pay what you can. There's 3 tiers of pricing, and whichever feels appropriate or right for you is what you can choose. And if all of those are inaccessible to you, then you just hit me up. I got lots of magical scholarships that I'm not very discerning about. So I want everybody to be able to do it. So
Wonderful. Wonderful. And I just, I want to say this in advance, and Lisa, I'm not saying when. Lisa, I will smack my hands and say, don't tell people this, but we definitely are going to be speaking with Meghan about hiring her to do something, for our community, broadly speaking. And it will be it probably sounds to me like what we've talked about in the past is this kind of sliding scale that we would offer as well. But let me just see, what else do we have for questions? I don't see any other questions coming at me, and it is 12:01, so I want to be cognizant of Meghan's time and Mary's. I know they're both very busy people, and I just really, really, again, want to thank you so much for your time, Meghan. I don't remember when or how I found you and reached out to you or how that kind of happened, but I was like just immediately enthralled with you and with the work that you do. And I started to see the power of it, the power of bringing it to our community. So thank you, Mary. So grateful to you and Dara and Sarah and everybody else who really, I remember those 3 hours of, because I was like, whoa, what's happening here? And, I knew that all I could say was, sounds brilliant. Gosh, please go ahead and do it. I wish that we could support you and kind of have it come under now, but we were in that point where we were like, we can't do a single new thing yet. But I said at the time, I'm sure in the not too distant future, we will reach out to you and ask if you need support, would like support. And we're just thrilled, so thrilled and excited about this offering. I think we're going to get a lot of attention in a lot of different areas for it. So between what you're doing and what Meghan is doing, just really excited for the place of story in our community. I do want to let everybody know that, speaking of mental health, that we've just launched a series with our partner, Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center. And this Thursday is our first online skills building series. It'll be a skills building series for anxiety. And that's on this Thursday, the 30th. I think it's at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern. And the next one will be October 28th. It'll be skills building for depression. And the third one will be skills building for grief on December 2nd. And these will be facilitated by 2 clinicians from Pathlight. They'll be incredibly useful, really kind of purposeful and practical information for those of us who exist with anxiety, depression, or grief. And also on October 5th, I will be hosting a workshop with another clinician from Pathlight called When Overworking Stops Working. Those of you who know me know that that's my thing. That's what I'm currently in recovery from these days. Meghan might need to show up. All of these workshops will be available. Please sign up for them. If you can't access them live, as long as you sign up and register, you will be provided with the link to watch them on demand. So we really look forward to seeing you there. Next Monday, Lisa, this is where I often.
Hey, I got you, because I just
Thank
want to
you.
also step forward and say thank you so much, Dawn, for your grace, your wisdom, your space holding. I've got some pretty big shoes to fill. For anyone that's tuning in right now, Dawn's been facilitating and hosting this series for over a year. And so just so deeply grateful for everything that you've done to contribute to the success of this program. So many people have been touched by this and have learned so much in their recovery. So thank you for that. And up next, I will be your host. And I'm being joined by Cynthia Phelps, who's going to talk to us about using your inner voice to thrive in recovery. So that's coming up next Monday, and we're really excited. Cynthia is a She Recovers coach.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm looking forward to not having to brush my hair or put on a lipstick to attend Mental Health Monday going forward. So I'll still be here. I just won't be sitting in this chair. Thank you again, Meghan and Mary and everybody who's joined us. This has really been absolutely wonderful.